Joanna Wyckoff here. Today we're going to be talking about understanding Medicare IRMAA, life change events, possible appeals, reconsiderations, and possible ways that your clients can do IRMAA planning with their tax professional before they're Medicare eligible to reduce, minimize their effect on IRMAA. So let's go. So what is IRMAA? IRMAA stands for Income Related Monthly Adjustment Amount. It affects people, beneficiaries enrolled in Medicare Part B or D when their modified adjustment gross amount is above the income tax filing status for IRMAA, in addition to their regular monthly Part B and D premiums. It may also be referred to as Medicare subsidy reduction. The IRS sends Social Security tax data where they determine if someone is going to be affected by IRMAA. If the data received by the IRS does not indicate that a beneficiary must pay IRMAA, the SSA cannot impose an IRMAA penalty. As with all things related to Social Security and Medicare, there's a policy. Here, the policy regarding all IRMAA starts on the table of contents, high 01101, period 000, Medicare income related monthly adjustment amount. Here it shows you many of the policies where Social Security applies to someone who might be affected by IRMAA. So here is the sliding scale for beneficiaries, and it's broken down by Part B and D and by income. And there is 3 classifications: single, head of household, qualifying surviving spouse with dependent tax filing. Then there's married filing joint. And then there's less commonly known married filing separately. It's going to start raising here for their B and then their D, and the D is on top of their regular plan premium. So there's a scale for each income bracket. When I sit with clients, I say, Mr. and Mrs. Jones, I want to ask you some questions to see if you qualify or are affected by any federal, state, or manufacturer programs. Is that okay with you? So first I preemptively tell them why I'm going to be nosy, because otherwise they might feel a little intrusive. And then I show them this chart on the 2024 fact sheet, and I ask them, do you and your spouse's combined income fall anywhere on this chart? And they'll show you where they fall. And then you want to clarify, how do you and your spouse file your taxes, jointly or separately? Because that is going to affect them a lot. If you come down here, you see that filing jointly starts here, but filing separately, they're automatically imposed in IRMAA if they made over $103,000, and it's one of the highest brackets. So how someone files in 2022 will greatly affect what they pay in 2024. Now, sometimes people are given some not great advice by tax professionals who might not understand IRMAA and its implications. And so sometimes people might need to seek out new tax professionals who understand IRMAA, and they might even want to amend their taxes to mitigate the risk of IRMAA. Also, if someone is actually living apart from their spouse, they actually don't get there's a policy where they can not be applied that penalty here. Let's go. Filing separately. If the couple lived apart all year, they can have a new initial determination made. This is not widely known nor spoken about, but it happens often. When the IRS applies SSA with tax filing status, married filing separately, Social Security assumes that the couple lived together at some point in a tax year and uses married filing separately. In order to process a new request, Social Security collects statements under penalty of perjury from the affected party. Now, they are not going to apply this to the other spouse. Both have to apply for it to affect their individual records. So if I go in and I'm married filing separately from my spouse, he would also have to go in for it to affect his record, because they're not going to apply what they're doing to my record to someone else's record. They each have to do it. So Social Security helps collect the data, and they ask for the IRS 1040. They ask for obtain attestation, and it is under penalty of perjury. It does happen where people are legally married and maybe they haven't seen their spouse in years and they just haven't gotten a divorce, right? Or maybe somebody's living abroad or something like that. So they ask to try to collect as much information. Do you know where they live? And then they process a new determination. So this is a great way to help someone who's maybe negatively impacted by a spouse living outside of their household with a combined income of $103,000. So Social Security sends two notices. The first one is a predetermined notice. It's sent when somebody first applies for Medicare Part B or D. And they tell them what information was used to compute the IRMAA, what the beneficiary can do if the tax information provided by the IRS is wrong, what the beneficiary can do if SSA used 3-year prior information, the beneficiary has a copy of their 2-year prior tax return, what the beneficiary can do if the tax filing status of married filing separately for the tax year was used and they lived apart from their spouse the entire tax year, and what the beneficiary can do if there was a life change event with a reduction in income. This notice does not include appeal rights, but it will invite beneficiaries to contact Social Security within 10 days if the beneficiary believes that the information is incorrect before SSA applies IRMAA. And that's really important because beneficiaries get notifications, and many times we find out that they ignore the mail and they wait and it gets delayed, and then IRMAA is applied and they're frustrated because now they're paying more than they should or want to, and they haven't taken the necessary steps spelled out in the letter the Social Security sent to them to take action. So then there's another determination made, and this is called the initial determination notice. And it's when Social Security makes an initial determination regarding IRMAA. Social Security sends a decision notice 20 days or more after issuing the predetermination notice to new filers and attainers. These notices contain appeal rights and inform the beneficiary to contact Social Security if one of the following situation applies. The beneficiary experiencing a life change event that causes significant reduction in MAGI. Social Security used a PY3 data, and the beneficiary can supply a copy of the year 2 data. The beneficiary filed and IRS accepted an amended income tax return for the year they're using to set up an IRMAA. There was an error in the information provided to Social Security by the IRS, and the beneficiary can provide proof of the IRS acknowledging the error and the correction, or the beneficiary had a filing status of married filing separately and reports living apart from their spouse at all times during the year, not part of the time, all times. And this is shown on their policy here. On their policy here, everything has a policy. The initial IRMAA determined notices. It talks about the predetermined notice and the initial determined notice. So before it's in effect, they've been notified twice with every step that might affect them spelled out. So when people say, I didn't know about this, nobody told me, probably because they didn't open their mail. Almost every notice from Social Security includes appeal rights. Now, an appeal might not be the necessary step needed if someone has a life change event. An appeal essentially means that the facts of the case are wrong. So if someone says, well, yes, I did make that money, however, I've since retired, that's not an appeal. That's a life change event. That's a different form. An appeal means IRS is reporting the wrong income. They said I made $1 million, but I really only made 100,000. That would be an appeal. And there's also different ways to mitigate that. So the policy for requesting an appeal on I have a reading program. Social Security uses information from the Internal Revenue Service to make the initial determination. When can someone file an appeal? A beneficiary or their beneficiary representative can file a request for reconsideration within 60 days of receipt of an IRMAA determination notice. The date received means 5 days after that date of notice, unless the individual shows that he or she did not receive it within 5 days. Requests received outside this allowable time frame, Social Security, the Department of Health and Human Services determines whether a good cause is established for late filing. A good cause is normally someone who was really sick and couldn't make a decision. Maybe they were in the hospital or otherwise incapacitated and couldn't make a decision. It's usually not just because they didn't open their mail. There's different levels of appeals. The first is a reconsideration, where someone in the local field office reviews the initial determination to make sure that the facts of the case are true and correct. Then the second one is a hearing before the administrative law judge in the Office of Medicare Hearings and Appeals. And then the next one is a review by the Appeals Council. And then the next is a federal court action. In my experience, it usually never goes beyond a reconsideration for an IRMAA level, an IRMAA reason. Usually is just the facts of the case are normally corrected or a new initial determination is done. So they have a whole workflow of processes to take. So if a beneficiary disagrees with the planned action as stated in the predetermination notice, and the claims representatives are supposed to look for life change events, or if there's an amended tax return, or if they used the correct year, and the tax filing status and married filing separately or living apart, they're supposed to develop that. If someone still continues to disagree and none of those are factual, then everybody has the right to file an appeal. Filing an appeal could just be that. It could not go anywhere. Just because I don't like that IRMAA exists doesn't mean I'm going to win an IRMAA appeal decision. So some people, they file it because they constitutionally, legally charging IRMAA, and it's just a process. It usually just delays the inevitable. As insurance agents, most of us will live in this policy right here. Life change events. Most of the time, our beneficiaries, when they're affected by IRMAA, will have a life change event sooner or later, usually. Those life change events, death of a spouse, marriage, divorce, or work stoppage, that happens most of the time where someone's making decent money at 63, 65, 66, 67, they decide to take their retirement, go to the house. This is usually where IRMAA life change event is filed, is when someone stops or reduces their work. The next one is a loss of income producing property to no fault of their own. Not that they sold the property, but that they lost income producing property, maybe in a natural disaster like a hurricane, tornado, wildfire, or if they had a loss of employer pension, or they were in receipt of a settlement payment from a current or former employer. Other life change events is if amended tax returns were filed, correction of IRS information, use of a 2-year-old tax return, and report of a living arrangement. This is when a new initial determination can be made instead of an appeal. So when we find out that one of those changes occurs, the beneficiary can file a new initial determination request, must have a qualifying circumstance, and they must either request it verbally or in writing that they use other tax information like the current year. And each spouse has to request this. So if I go into the Social Security office and my spouse is not with me, they're only going to apply it to my record. They're not going to touch his record. He also has to request it if it's affecting his record, which it should. He has to request it individually. So I always suggest that married couples who live together, married filing jointly, go into Social Security offices together so both of their records can be worked on simultaneously and they're not incorrectly not processed. So some examples of non-qualifying life-changing events. This happens quite often. Ordinary loss of dividend income. That's where people are losing money in their retirement accounts. Higher medical expenses, higher living expenses, loss of child support, loss of alimony, voluntary sale of income producing property. Happens all the time. Other ones are capital gains from the sale of property, lottery winnings, casino winnings, conversion of an IRA, or cash and bonds. So the procedure for handling a report of a non-qualifying life change event, they have a workflow for everything. If the beneficiary requests a new initial determination based on an event other than one listed in the original section, They review the information and documents. They investigate further to find a valid life change event. If no valid life change event for IRMAA purposes involved, advise the beneficiary that the event does not qualify and explain what a qualifying life change event is. And if the beneficiary still insists, they may file an appeal. Social Security representatives are not able to refuse someone from filing an appeal. They always have to take the appeal paperwork. Now, whether someone actually wins an appeal, it's a different story. So just if one of these happens, and usually we see voluntary sale of an income producing property, second houses, casino and lottery winnings, capital gains from sales of property, sometimes that occurrence might also coincide with a real life change event that is qualifying, like a work reduction, work stoppage. So some people get lucky that they happen in the same time frame and they get a new decision based off the current year. But appeals are not supposed to be won based off of non-qualifying life change events like these. Sometimes some people's miles may vary because it is manually processed by claims representatives. So they might get lucky. I always advise people if they feel that they have documentation to help their case to file it, because I don't work for the government and they may have a overlap in life change event that wins. So I never discourage anybody from filing an appeal. They're always welcome to file an appeal. I don't work for the government anymore. So I just tell them, how to process it. One of the life change events is loss of income producing property. And here's the policy for it. And like I said, it's usually affecting not due to their own fault, where maybe they had a loss, crops, real property, livestock, vehicles used for the business, and it could have been accidents, things like that, not due to their own fault, natural disaster, disease, arson, things like that. And there's always information that's requested to prove the allegation, and a list of them are filed here. And they have a whole steps on how Social Security is supposed to process these. The next life change event, reduction or loss of pension income. This is not normal, but sometimes some pensions, think old pensions by private companies, some of them might cease their benefits. And it's usually called a plan failure or termination. They normally get a notification, and they would just provide that to Social Security for a new determination to be done. The next one, employer settlement payment. This happens pretty common nowadays when people are given settlements to maybe retire early, or maybe if their job was no longer provided for and they were laid off, they might have a settlement from the employer. And that income, let's say my employer laid me off and paid me out next year's salary. So now I'm being imposed in IRMAA because I got double the salary. They just need to file that new determination request with Social Security and provide the document from the employer. So a statement from an employer or the attorney with a settlement in terms. Now, when someone files an appeal, there's a whole process, and this policy goes through the reconsideration process. And it's not, so if someone immediately jumps to conclusion on their initial determining letter, and instead of filing an SSA 44, they file an SSA 561, the appeal might just be rejected because they didn't tell Social Security the real reason for them appealing, and they might have filed the wrong form. And I see this all the time on social media where insurance agents are using the wrong terminology. You don't want to file an appeal if you worked and stopped working. You want to file a life change event. So to file a life change event, Social Security Form 44, and they need to document the reason, provide the documentation, whether it's a retirement letter or proof of the loss. And then I always recommend to walk it into the local Social Security office and always make copies or request a copy to be made before you give your documents to someone. Now, if you walked into my former Social Security office with your documents, usually in the morning, you would usually could be wait to be seen if there was anybody there who could process that work that day. I prefer it to be done that way, and always keep copies. So never mail in your only originals. Always keep a copy. Now, some solutions, I suggest everybody work with a good CPA way before they take their Medicare to fix either married filing separately issues, to see if they can make charitable contributions to reduce their and lower their MAGI, to see if they can utilize a Roth IRA instead of an IRA for some cash withdrawals, to spread out withdrawals for cash needs across a few years instead of taking a big lump sum. And if you had earned income, to continue to make tax deductible retirement contributions. Now, me as an insurance professional, I can't give tax advice. So I always try to have CPA referral partners where I can say, hey, go to so and so. They can give you better tax advice to try to mitigate this risk, especially if I'm meeting them at 62, 63. I really want to send them and make sure that their IRMAA planning is actually done correctly. It's a really good way to build rapport in the community and also have a really good referral partner so the CPA sends people back to you. So agent education, I always discuss IRMAA in all my presentations and ask them their income and filing status. I never assume that someone is single just because they haven't mentioned a spouse, or that they are married filing jointly and not married filing separately, because a lot of people do their own taxes and don't seek out CPAs.
That's a wrap. If this helped you close more deals, hit follow. New agent training drops every week only on Top Flight Insurance.